This is our Get Lit with All of It Book Club live radio event with Jennifer Weiner and her latest novel, The Summer Place. Thanks to our partners at the New York Public Library, 5,972 of you were able to check out an e-copy and read The Summer Place along with us. And listeners, we want to hear your questions for Jennifer. We're doing our Q&A session live on the radio in about 15 or 20 minutes. What questions do you have for Jennifer Weiner about The Summer Place or about writing? Give us a call, 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. We'll get to your calls in about 15, 20 minutes. Also, social media is available. You can hit us up on Twitter at All of It WNYC, as well as Instagram. There's an Instagram story up there right now where you can answer the question if you have a question for Jennifer Weiner. Of course, also on the show today, Sutton Foster, who read the audiobook for The Summer Place, and Lara Downes is our musical guest. We have special performances from Lara as well. So let's get this started. Here's a quick recap of the plot of The Summer Place. We are introduced to the Weinberg-Levy family through an engagement announcement. 22-year-old Ruby plans to wed her pandemic boyfriend, Gabe. It's a shock. Her stepmom, Sarah, worries they are too young. It also triggers Sarah's own feelings about marrying young and giving up her dreams of becoming a concert pianist. Ruby's dad, Eli, is also worried about the engagement because it is possible Ruby's fiance, her son, is maybe his son. Years ago, he slept with a woman who claimed he was the father, and now he's pretty sure that child is Gabe, the fiance. Wait, there are more secrets. The wedding is set to take place at Sarah's mother's house on the Outer Cape, and Sarah's mom, Ronnie, a former successful writer, is harboring some secrets of her own, including doubts about the paternity of her children. And unfortunately, she's a terminal cancer diagnosis. Okay, one more. Here's Sam, Sarah's twin brother, who is coming to the wedding with a new realization of his own. At nearly 40 years old, he's discovered that he's more attracted to men than he's ever been to women. All these family members come to Cape Cod to celebrate Ruby's wedding, but their secrets, lies, past transgressions, realizations come out and potentially tear the family apart. I'm delighted that Jennifer Weiner is joining us live for our July Get Lit with All of It Radio Book Club event. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello, I am so glad to be here. My God, listening to that recap, I'm like, this is the soapiest thing I've ever written.
It is it's soapy, but it's also kind of like an old-fashioned farce of closed doors, open doors, people running around in circles.
Exactly.
Half siblings who could be in love. How did that part of the plot come to you, that potentially, we're not going to give anything away.
Not going to give anything
potentially
away.
These half siblings could have fallen in love.
Yes. Okay. So the last book I wrote dealt with some really heavy themes. The Me Too movement, sexual assault, moving past something terrible and building a life. So after I got through with all of that, I'm like, I want to write something that is light as a souffle. I want farce, I want drama, I want romance, I want, like you said, somebody walking into a bedroom just as somebody's leaving and missing a really important piece of information. That was the book that I wanted to write, and every writer is her own first reader. So that was also the book that I wanted to read. So I start off, I figure out like the mechanics of the plot. And I knew right away that I would have these twins, Sam and Sarah, who astute readers will recognize from That Summer. They were the children who one of the characters was nannying before the big bad thing happens to her. So Sam and Sarah are now all grown up. They come from a very privileged place, which they recognize to varying degrees. They have this beautiful home in Cape Cod. They've had loving parents. They've had college educations. They've had a lot of advantages, but they're still struggling with questions of how to be a person in the world and what you want to be when you grow up, basically. And once I had the two of them, and I'm thinking, okay, we've all been through the quarantines, and I'd read some articles about the fast track romance of it all. The people in New York, mostly, who had just started dating when the shelter at home orders came and just decided to move in together because, rather than like pay for two leases or whatever, they're just like, let's see where this goes. So I knew I wanted a young couple like that. And then it was just kind of off to the races.
I'm curious about the location too of Cape Cod. Right now I'm on Martha's Vineyard. I'm on the Cape. So And there's, you know, there's a lot in the novel. I'm getting ahead a little bit, but I think it's important to talk about, even though it's very light and exciting, you deal with class a lot in
Yes.
this novel,
Yes.
and about people who, you know, live in these areas, and then a bunch of privileged people pour in the summer and have a certain attitude and a certain behavior, and how even within people who are come to these places in the summer are stratified in terms of class. Some people
Yes.
live, the pond people. Would you describe who the pond people are in your book?
Oh, yes. Okay. So the pond people are the old money wasps who have been on the Cape for generations, ever since, you know, great great grandpa Adams built that cottage by the shore. And in some cases, the old money is now the gone money. Like there's not a lot left, but these people are sort of holding on to the notion of what their families once were and what their names once meant, in a world that is increasingly rejecting that, and rejecting the notion that being a white person who came over on the Mayflower means you get to make the rules for everybody else. So the pond people are in varying places of acceptance of this, is what I'll say. You know, and Lord love them, they're trying, but it is expensive to live on Cape Cod and to maintain a second home. And a lot of them are really kind of struggling with that piece of it. And so you end up with, you know, these addresses that sound very grand, but then you get there and it's sort of these like falling apart shacks with, you know, the see-through sheets that grandma bought and haven't been replaced in 50 years. And then there's some conversation about like, well, can these people afford to live any differently? And if they can, is this somehow fun for them to sort of go off for the summer and live in a shack with no air conditioning and see-through sheets and one bathroom for 10 people and pretend to be poor, I guess, you know, to sort of, you know, fetishize that aspect of it, as some upper class families do. And I would point to my friend Curtis Sittenfeld's novel, An American Wife, which deals like very specifically with that strain of WASP living.
And in the book, the house has a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is the location really important, the house itself is important. When did that come to you, that the house would fill us in? Maybe the house is the most reliable narrator. Possibly.
It could be. And that's interesting you say that, because where the talking house came from, I read an article about sound waves and about how sound works, which, okay, so I'm not a science person. I will preface this by saying that I'm probably going to get this wrong, but sound is vibrations. We hear noise, and what we're hearing is molecular particles vibrating. And those particles continue to vibrate at shorter and shorter intervals. So like past the point that we can hear them, but dogs still can hear. And then there passes a point where even dogs can't hear them, but the vibrations continue smaller and smaller and smaller, but they keep going forever. So basically any conversation that you've ever had inside a house at some level is still going on. The words continue to echo. And when I read that, I reacted very much, not as a scientist, but as a novelist. I'm like, this is the most fascinating thing I have ever heard in my life, because what it means is that houses really do hold memories. They hold those conversations because they're still going on. And I really responded to that idea as a writer. And I'm like, okay, so if that is true, if houses are really the repositories of memory, I am going to have a house that really has strong feelings about the conversations that have taken place, the people who have lived there. Like this house has seen it all, has heard everything, and of course is going to have a take on who belongs to who and how things should unfold.
My guest is Jennifer Weiner. It's our Get Lit with All of It July book club selection, The Summer Place. Okay, so we talked about the style, the farce, the lightness, but we also talked about the location and some of the issues of class. We've talked about the house. So let's talk about a couple of themes. There's a big theme of motherhood in this book, and what it means to be a mother, the pressures, the responsibilities that are put on mothers. What are some of the angles that you wanted to examine about motherhood in The Summer Place?
You know, one of the questions I think novelists ask themselves a lot is like, what is the worst thing that I could imagine? What is the worst thing I could have happen to this character? What is the worst thing I could have this character do? And I knew there were going to be different iterations of motherhood in this book. There was going to be mothers, stepmothers, step grandmothers. And I knew that I also wanted to have a woman who walks away from motherhood, which to me was the most shocking and sort of transgressive thing I could imagine. And then I had to ask myself, like, okay, well, why is that so terrible? Why is this so hard for me to think of? Like, why am I finding myself just like wanting to blame this woman and wanting to dislike her and not understand her very much? So what's happened is there's a young woman, Ruby's biological mother. Ruby's the young woman who's engaged, and her mom's name is Annette, and Annette always knew she did not want to be a mother. She wanted to travel. She wanted to see the world. She wanted to have adventures. She wanted to do all of these things, and they did not involve marriage and the suburbs and the baby in the carriage. She didn't want that. Then she got pregnant. And while lucky Annette still lived in a world where she had options and choices available to her, she sort of gets a little peer pressured / bullied into marrying this nice Jewish guy. So she gets married, she has a baby, she is miserable. She knows that she's not doing right by this child and that she's not honoring her own sense of who she is. Like, she knows that this isn't going to be any good for her, and it's probably not going to be any good for Ruby. And so she leaves. And she understands that leaving is going to put this huge target on her back, that everyone is going to judge her, that everyone is going to have something to say about it. But she, in a way, it's the most selfless thing that she can do, because she understands that, like, instead of Ruby growing up with a mother who doesn't want to be there, who is struggling with sort of every inch of this and every minute of it, that Eli is going to get married again. He's going to find someone who is all in, or a little, at least a lot more in than Annette could ever be. And that Ruby is probably going to be better for it. And it was really interesting to think about, like, that notion of a mother who walks away and how differently we treat those women than we do fathers who walk away or get divorced or take jobs in other states or whatever it is that they're doing. And I even have Annette thinking in the book that the world extends grace to men like that because there's so many of them. And if we don't, we're rejecting thousands of men. But, like, if you're a woman, like, forget it. Like, you are a pariah in a lot of cases.
My guest is Jennifer Weiner. We're talking about The Summer Place. If you'd like to get in on the conversation, our phone lines are officially open now. 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. If you'd like to ask Jennifer a question live on the air about The Summer Place, about writing, we would be glad to connect you to 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692 is our number. Our social media is at all of it WNYC. So the story has all these twists and turns and secrets. How did you, as a writer, think about the pacing, and how were you able to create the pacing that you wanted ultimately?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you've got a lot of characters and you've got a lot of plot and a lot of twists and a lot of turns and revelations, I always think of what do I like to read? What do I want to happen? Like, where do I want there to be a moment where, like, my jaw just drops open and I'm like, what even happened? And how did I miss it? And then you have to go back and try to figure it out. And it's funny. I don't write like the short chapters that you see in some novels, like, the 3-page, punchy, and then you're just on to the next one. But I always try to make it so that, I imagine a reader who's sort of in bed and it's late and she's tired, but then she's like, I just got to read one more chapter. I just got to find out what happens next. Mm-hmm. And I always think of something that my mother used to tell me, which is like, your books are real page turners, Jenny. And I'm not sure she entirely meant it as a compliment, because my mom read very literary fiction that was perhaps not as fly through those pages. But, I think that in the summertime, especially, there's nothing wrong with a book that kind of keeps you guessing, keeps it moving, and you just want to keep reading to find out what's going to happen next.
There are secrets. People are keeping secrets right and left from one another in this book. Parents are keeping secrets from children. Why do the parents in this novel sort of universally decide to keep these and hold on to these heavy secrets rather than talk to their children? Some of them are adults now, about what's going on.
Yeah, I always think of the old joke about the couple in their 80s that like goes to the divorce lawyer and they're like, we want a divorce. And the lawyer's like, at your age, after you've been married for so long. And the wife says, we wanted to wait till the children were dead. And I think with the people in my book, they didn't want to wait till the children were dead. But I think that they sort of had this idea that they were protecting their kids, that they were keeping these secrets because they wanted to sort of create the icon of a parent on whom a child can rely. And that means you don't screw up, like you don't necessarily let your kids see that you are fallible and flawed, because you want them to feel safe and secure and to trust that you know what you're doing, even though you don't always know what you're doing. And I think it's a real balance that you have to strike, because you want to tell your kids the truth. You want to tell them in a way that they can understand it, and in a way that hopefully helps them understand why you made the choices that you did. But it's always a question, I think, for a lot of parents of like, what do you tell them? When do you tell them? How do you tell them? Like if there's mental illness in the family or addiction in the family, like these are things that kids need to know. But it's a question of like, well, how much do they need to know? When do they need to know? And how do I frame this in a way that tells them what they need to know, but hopefully doesn't make me look so bad that they're like never going to trust me again? And it's tough.
One of the, and this is not a spoiler because you don't tell us, one of the secrets, the mysteries that never gets resolved is the true paternity of these twins, Sam and Sarah. So and there's a DNA test possibly floating out there in their future. So we actually, we hold our book club in between on Instagram, and we asked our readers whether they'd ever taken a DNA test themselves. 83% said no, 17% said yes. Why did you decide to leave this mystery a mystery?
Well, I guess I wanted to leave readers with the question of like, how much does it really matter, right? How much does it really matter who gave the DNA that became Sam and Sarah versus that the fact that they were shaped by these two very loving, very present, very committed people. But that it's so interesting because I think that like every writer I know is in some way intrigued by like these 23andMe tests and like what they can tell, the impulses behind taking them, and all of the trouble that can result. I've read articles about people finding out that the man they thought was their father was not their father, or they learn, they get their results and it's like, what do you mean I have 6 half brothers? And it turns out, dad had another family. And it's such a cookie jar for novelists. It's like, I don't know how you can't not like dip your hand into it. But I wanted it to be kind of a red herring, the question of like who the father really is, as Maury Povich used to ask for people who are old enough to remember that. And like, I guess the question I'm countering with is, how much does it even matter?
One of our listeners wants to know, did you ever consider confirming it? Was there ever a version where you confirmed Sarah and Sam's parent? That's from Jenia.
Yeah, there wasn't actually. I guess that would have meant I'd had to answer it in my own head, and I could see it playing out like every different way. So no, I never actually I never wrote a version where we find out definitively whether it's Gregory or whether it's Lee who has parented these two complicated humans.
You write in the acknowledgments, I knew I wanted to write about the ways that quarantine exposed the fault line in relationships. So you have Eli and Sarah, whose marriage, there were issues before this whole issue with Gabe came up. What fault lines existed between Eli and Sarah? Sarah has come in, married this man whose wife has decided to leave. He's got this young children. She seems like just ready to come in. But what happens? What fault lines start to emerge?
So I think every woman who saw the New York Times story about the division of labor in families during the pandemic is going to remember the picture that I'm about to describe. And it was a photograph of a woman with a baby in one arm and a laundry basket in the other, and her phone tucked against her shoulder because she was on a call while she was caring for a child and doing a load of laundry. And the picture on the facing page was her husband in his office with no laundry and no baby, sitting behind a very professional looking desk, looking very much like he could have been in an actual office out in the world. I can't remember exactly how many million women ended up leaving the workforce during the pandemic. I know that number has been reported a lot. And that was what I wanted to talk about the most, is even in these very progressive, right-minded relationships where, Eli sort of goes through this litany of all the ways he's doing the right thing. He puts his pronouns in his bio, and he's very careful about, the way he talks to women, and he's one of the good guys in his own estimation. And yet, when the pandemic happens, when everybody ends up going home, all of the burden, or at least a great deal of the burden of the housework, falls onto Sarah's shoulders, both the physical and the emotional labor of keeping the venture of the family up and running. And I think that was true for an awful lot of women. And I'm extremely lucky. I have a really supportive husband who does cook and does clean and drives carpools and helps out and does all of the things that you want a spouse to do. And I know that that makes me exceptionally lucky, because I think for a lot of women, who thought that they were living in kind of, feminist marriages, they discovered that they were the ones sort of picking up all of the slack and all of the socks on the floor and just dealing with all of the, the 1,000 tiny things that you have to do every single day to live in a house with a family. And that was what I wanted to show and talk about.
There's a hilarious detail that Sarah has about this moment. Sarah has this burning hatred of her husband's special plantar fasciitis flip-flops. She's always talking about how much she hates these flip-flops. How did you decide the flip-flops was going to be the thing?
Okay.
That would probably be standing in for something else? Or did she just hate the flip-flops?
So basically, people ask all the time, do you ever take things from your real life and put them in your novels? And I'm always like, oh, usually I change details, or I'll take inspiration, or blah, blah, blah. In this case, those flip-flops are my husband's flip-flops. They are Vionic plantar fasciitis flip-flops. And I don't know what they are making these things with, but they sound so flip-floppy. The noise that they make is like the concentrated essence of 100 pairs of flip-flops on the boardwalk, which is not a sound I mind in its proper context, namely the boardwalk in the summer. But just hearing these flip-flops all day long, up and down the stairs during the pandemic, I thought I was going to lose my mind. I thought I was going to have to either set them on fire or set myself on fire. It was awful. And, I would love to tell you that the flip-flops are a symbol, or they are shorthand, or they are the encapsulation of every tiny annoying thing that this man does. But they're just my husband's flip-flops. I'm sorry.
They're just flip-flops.
They're just
my guest.
Sometimes the flip-flops are just flip-flops.
My guest is Jennifer.
Flip-flops are just flip-flops.
My guest is Jennifer Weiner. The book is The Summer Place. It's our July Get Lit with All of It book club selection. After the break, we'll take your calls. We'll check in our Instagram poll about whether listeners thought relationships could bounce back from infidelity. And we'll be joined by Sutton Foster, who This is All of It on WNYC. It's a July Get Lit with All of It book club radio event. Our guest is Jennifer Weiner. She's the author of The Summer Place. Jennifer, we got a call from Maria from West New York. Hi, Maria. You're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon, and thanks so much for this. Jennifer, I'm loving the book, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and I'm loving Sutton Foster's performance of it. I think she's perfect. The question I have is about your process writing this book, given that the time you write about is, in some ways, it still feels like it's going on in some ways, although I know some people have kind of completely moved past the pandemic and everything. But I was just curious, when did you start writing it? How many iterations did it take, et cetera, et cetera? What was all of that like for you? Thank you so much.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for reading the book. I'm very grateful. And I'm so glad that you are listening to it, because I think Sutton just like knocked it out of the park. I feel so lucky that she narrated this. In terms of my process, so books take me about a year from start to finish, from like first draft to when it ends up in the bookstore. So I want to say that I started writing this sort of really early spring of 2021. And it's interesting. I didn't want to write a quote unquote pandemic novel, mostly because I didn't want to read a pandemic novel. I didn't want to read a book that sort of sent me back to like the awful early days, or like dealt with, the uncertainty or like all of the loss. But I wanted that to be a part of the story, not all of the story, but a part of it. So I do talk about masks and quarantines and people that are going back to their offices for the first time after so long. Mostly because I think that the pandemic gave us some really useful plot lines. There was lots of comedy with all of the people who ended up sort of stuck at home together, wives learning things about their husbands, husbands learning things about their wives, parents learning things about their children. I mean, personally, I will never forget the day that I came down for lunch at like noon, and my daughter is sitting with her laptop, which is closed, and like a huge plate of chicken fingers. And I'm like, aren't you supposed to be in class right now? And like through her mouthful of processed chicken and breading, she says, I'm in PE. I'm like, how are you in PE? And she's like, I turn the camera on when the teacher tells us to do something. So, I think that there was lots of comedy, but I also think there was, the serious pieces. And I didn't want to turn away from that or pretend it wasn't happening. So that's my answer.
You might have recognized that laugh because it belongs to, who was laughing along with us, two-time Tony Award-winning actress Sutton Foster. She's been incredibly busy starring in The Music Man on Broadway. She wrote her memoir. That's the last time she was here. It's called Hooked: How Crafting Saved My Life. Of course, she wrapped up Younger, one of my favorite shows. Somehow she found time to read the audiobook of Jennifer's novel, The Summer Place, our Get Lit selection. So let's talk about this. Sutton, first of all, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
How did you become aware of Jennifer's books at first, and how did you start recording them? You did that summer as well.
Yes. So I'm a big fan of Jennifer. And she actually came on Younger. She did a cameo on Younger as herself. But I'm In Her Shoes is one of my favorite books. And I love her. And I'd never really done audiobooks before, but again, during the pandemic, like during the lockdown, I was offered that summer, and I was so excited, and I recorded it from my closet, and it was just like amazing because an audiobook takes like 30 hours, or it takes a long time, so you get to spend all of this time with these characters and these stories, and I just love going on her journeys, and so I recorded The Summer Place right after The Music Man opened on Broadway, which seems crazy, but I just couldn't say no because I was so excited to be asked again, and I just was so excited, and I thought, and it was freezing because I recorded it in February, and I was like, you know what? I need to go to the summer. I need to be in Cape Cod. I need to go away for a little bit. I was like, I need lobster rolls, and so this time I recorded in my daughter's closet, so I was surrounded by like unicorn and fairy dresses and sequin shoes, and when the book gets a little saucy, it was a little weird, but because I'm in my daughter's.
Are you talking about? I was going to dive right in there. I have to ask. There are parts of this book which are spicy,
yes,
and descriptive, Jennifer and Sutton, about various ways people feel and engage in intimate acts. So first of all, what was it like to read those parts, Sutton?
Okay, so I work with a wonderful producer, Randy, who we did that summer together, and she lives in Los Angeles, and so she's on Zoom, and I'm on Zoom. I'm in the closet. It's all very weird. I'm in a bathrobe, and she's like, Sutton, we're gonna need to have a drink after this scene. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. And so I was like, let's do it. And I don't know, you just kind of, I found myself, I don't know if this is what this means, but I found myself, when you're reading stuff, you make little mistakes and things as you go, and you kind of have to start over. But somehow during those saucy scenes, I just went right through them because I was so excited. So it was fun.
I love it that you were a one-take Jake when it came to the sex scenes. Jennifer, you just put your head in your hands when
I feel guilty. It's like, I don't want to be the reason people have to install locks on their children's closet doors, and yet here we are. But okay, so in all serious though, I will tell you that like 90% of what I learned about sex, I think I learned from reading my friend Roseanne McFarlane's mother's Harlequins, right? Like, and I will tell you, women had orgasms in those books, and I feel a responsibility to the next generation of girls who are reading their mom's books that maybe they're not quite old enough for. Not necessarily, the scenes are spicy. They are not as explicit as some of the stuff out there, but I want to show girls that women have a good time during sex, that this is something like enjoyable and pleasurable and something they should, sane and consensually and happily and enthusiastically enter into when they are ready. If my child is out there listening to this,
right.
When you're 30 or something like that.
And they're beautifully written. They're beautifully written, and they're romantic and sexy and all of it. And you get swept up in all of them. So it's I wish I'd had these books when I was a teenager to read.
Thank you.
Sutton, was there a character that you related to, or that you related to where they were in their life?
Oh gosh, I guess Sarah. It was interesting. You were talking about like I keep thinking of the flip-flops. There's something about the flip-flops that really rang true for me. Or like, those little nuances of being, because I have a 5-year-old daughter. I'm married. We were all together during that pandemic time. And just, there was something about her of, I really related to her. Not completely, but just in that idea of, just looking at life at a certain time, and you're at a certain age at a certain time of your life.
I think Sarah must have been really interesting for you specifically though, because she's somebody who like turned away from that like big creative life. And having read your memoir, it doesn't sound like that there was ever like a moment where you're like, should I pursue this, or should I sort of do something safe and more conventional? But I think for a lot of women, like everybody talks about like the one who got away. And I think that for some women, the one who got away isn't a guy, it's a life. And, for Sarah, it's the idea that there was this sort of totally different direction that she should have gone in. But it was a question mark, was she talented enough to succeed doing that or not? And I think that's something that was, interesting for me to write about, certainly. And I think interesting for women to think about.
Yeah.
So Sutton, you've also, in addition to recording this, I got an alert yesterday in my email that you've recorded the cast album for The Music Man.
We did. We recorded it on Monday.
Tell us a little
Yes,
bit more about it.
it was, you know, it was a thrill. It's interesting. All of a sudden, I thought of my book too. It's like these little and there's something about capturing not only this revival but this moment in time. It's like a little time capsule of like even just where the show is, because the show is this living, breathing thing. We've been doing it, performing it now for almost 7 months on Broadway, and usually recordings are done earlier in the run. But I'm actually really grateful that we waited so long to record it, because it's almost like it's marinated in a different place, and so we're capturing it at this moment. And it was awesome. It was a dream come true. It was like a perfect, amazing day. But I was thinking about Hooked as well. It's like, again, it's sort of like a little time capsule. You know, I wrote it. You must think that. I don't know if you think that too, Jennifer, about like when you write things, it's like you're writing them from that moment of where you are in your life and like all of the things you know right then. And like, you know, Hooked has already evolved, and if I were to write it today, it would probably be different, you know, but where I wrote it, and I wrote it during the lockdown. So again, it's like, you know, using that time to kind of
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. Like every book you write is always a snapshot of where you are in that moment. And it's almost like a letter to your future self, you know? So like you'll be able to look back at Hooked, and I'll be able to look back at like my summer books and be like, oh my God, the pandemic, and remember that, and wasn't that so crazy? And, you know, who can believe that we made it through that? And, you know, and the same way as like when I wrote Little Earthquakes, which was my third novel, like I had just become a mother, and I was just going through all of that first time mom stuff. And so looking back at that book and just remembering like how overwhelmed I felt, and, you know, so full of love, but like also so full of like mortal terror that I was going to do something wrong and like mess this child up for the rest of her life, you know, and that's just how it is. And you get to go back and read them again. And that there's real pleasure in that.
Yeah.
The name of the book is The Summer Place. You can read it. You can listen to Sutton Foster read it. My guests have been Jennifer Weiner and Sutton Foster. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for being our author, Jennifer, and thank you, Sutton, for making time. We know you're really busy.
Oh, I'm so honored. Honestly, it's an honor to read your words. I love it.
Ah, wow. Sutton is amazing. I feel very lucky that she's my narrator, hopefully forever and ever. And
I hope so.
Thank you for having me. This is a great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Stay cool.
Yes.
Bye.
This is our Get Lit with All of It special on-air edition of our monthly book club. Joining us now is musical guest for the month, pianist Lara Downes. As you know, one of the main characters in The Summer Place was a talented pianist. Lara was named 2022 Classical Woman of the Year by American Public Media's Performance Today. Her work takes an inclusive view of classical music. She's recorded albums inspired by Bach, as well as reimaginings of Duke Ellington and Sam Cooke. Through her label, Rising Sun Music, she sought to elevate Black composers such as Florence Price and Margaret Bonds. Her latest album, released earlier this year, is titled Reflections, Scott Joplin Reconsidered. Next week, she will make her debut with the Philadelphia Orchestra in, by the way, what happens to be Jennifer Weiner's hometown. Joining me now with some special performances and a little bit of a chat is Lara Downes. Lara, welcome back to the show.
Hi, so great to see you.
As you know, the character Sarah in The Summer Place, we saw your Instagram, you reading the book, so great. She plays piano and she has aspirations to do it professionally. What advice do you give aspiring classical musicians?
To love it, like to do this because you love it and you need to do this, and also to know why you do it. And it's funny, when I was reading the book and I was reading about Sarah's, you know, her youth and her struggles with this decision, whether she wants to pursue this as a profession. I think the one thing you never learn in conservatory is to question the why of your music. And, you know, that's kind of what you learn in the School of Hard Knocks. But I really try in my mentorship of young musicians to instill that every day. Just ask yourself why. And when you discover why, it really changes your outlook about this life and this art form.
Through your work, though your work's otherwise focused on more 20th century American composers like Sarah. You tackled Bach. In 2011, you released an album reimagining Bach's Goldberg variations. Yours is called 13 Ways of Looking at Goldberg, Bach Reimagined. What inspired that album, the reimagining of Bach? I love that idea.
Yeah, but it's reimagining of so many things. I mean, you're right. I reimagined Bach. I've reimagined Billie Holiday, Sam Cooke, Ellington, Strayhorn. I think my big conflict with being an artist in today in the world and working in an art form that is always looking backwards is, how do we take this music that is historical, that is music of the past, and how do we keep it alive and relevant and like evolving? Because it just changes the way that we hear it, I think, and the way we experience it. So I'm always thinking about that. What does this mean today?
The first performance we're going to hear from you is Summerland from the composer William Grant Still. When was Still composing?
Well, through the early part of the 20th century, Harlem Renaissance. He was a key figure in the Harlem Renaissance. And what I love about his music is that it's gorgeous. It's really one of the most beautiful musical voices I know, but also that Still was a musician who had his hands in so many different areas. He was the first of many things. He was the first Black conductor to conduct his own work. He was the first Black composer, that whole story of being the first. Yeah. But also, he was a versatile musician who was playing oboe in the pit of Shuffle Along when it opened on Broadway, and then turning around and writing his first symphony. A very American approach to music making.
And what made you pick this song for today's show?
It is hands down one of my favorite pieces of music. And also, I mean, this book is set in the world of the summer, and this just evokes that kind of light and that kind of calm and that kind of feeling that anything can happen during the summertime.
Here is Lara Downes performing Summerland. That's Summerland, performed by Lara Downes, our guests for Get Lit with All of It. I also want to remind our audience, you will be able to see that performance and this whole hour because it's going to be on WNYC's YouTube channel in a couple of days. It's wonderful to see you perform that as well. Lara, so next week, you'll be making your debut with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Tell us what's going to happen. It's on August 4th at 7:30.
Yes. So this is up at their summer home at Saratoga Springs, Saratoga Performing Arts Center. And of course, it's a dream to play with this orchestra, one of our greatest American orchestras. And this piece of music by Florence Price, another composer who had sort of a moment of being lost or unheard, who's having a beautiful renaissance. She was Black female composer, the first Black female composer ever to have her work performed by a major symphony orchestra in 1933, Chicago Symphony. But she grew up in Little Rock and then moved north to Chicago, part of the Great Migration. And again, just this incredibly distinct, very American voice. She's taking the music of her ancestry. She's taking African American melodies and rhythms and melding them with the European symphonic tradition. I don't know. As her piano concerto, it's just an exuberant and incredibly personal piece of music. So I'm so thrilled to be performing this piece that I love so much with this orchestra. We're also playing a new piece that's been written for me that's reimagining the music of Billy Strayhorn in a symphonic form. So it's just, when I talk about the why of the music, I think that I've found it in the embracing of music that's a bit off the beaten path, that I get to take and shine a light and bring it out into the world. And it's such a feeling of rediscovery and I don't know, just sharing. There's a feeling of openness about it that makes me very happy.
Lara Downes, we were so happy that you agreed to be our Get Lit with All of It musical guest. Your latest album is Reflections, Scott Joplin Reconsidered. We're going to go out on A Change Is Going to Come by Sam Cooke really quickly. Why did you pick this one?
Do you know that on page 3 of this book, on page 3, the very first opening introduction of this book, the house is speaking and the house is saying things were changing. And I mean, I love this piece of music. It speaks to me of my parents' generation. Of course, it's a civil rights anthem, but it's also just like, I don't know, I'm keeping it close to my heart right now because a change needs to come. We need to make it across the board for our planet, for ourselves, for our relationships, for everything. So it's an anthem for today, very much.
Lara Downes, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.